Hello and welcome to IO Codes. In today's video, we are going to be looking at how to create an authorization server with Springboot, Spring Security, and the Spring OAuth2 framework. Now, for us to get started, we have to bootstrap our application, and in order for us to bootstrap our application, we'll be making use of the Spring Initilzr. So let's get started. I'm going to open up my browser now, and yes, we have it right here. And I will head over to start.spring.io so I'll be able to bootstrap my project. And the build tool we'll be using is Maven. I'll leave my language as Java. And yeah, we want to provide a couple of details. Now for the group ID, I'll make use of iocode.web.app. And the name of this project should be iocode Spring Authorization Server. Now, you obviously know you don't have to give it a name that I've given mine. To give it the name I've given mine, you can choose any name of your choice. Well, that is what I pretty much want to choose. And you can make use of any Java version you prefer. For me, I'll be making use of Java version 21. And we have to include a couple of dependencies to our project. Now, these three dependencies are previously what I mentioned: the Spring Security dependency, Spring Web dependency, and the OAuth2 Authorization Server dependency. Now we have to generate our project, so I'll click on generate. And with this, we are good to go. So I'll open it in my file system, and right here I want to just right click, and then I want to extract. So what I want to do now is just simply extract to my desktop. I have a folder called Java projects, and I'll include a new folder here that I'll just say tutorial. And this is the folder I want to select. With that, I'll just simply extract. So now we can get started with our project. I'll open it up in IntelliJ. So right now we successfully bootstrapped our project. But before we get started with any code implementation, I just want to give you a brief overview of the OAuth2 framework. Now in the OAuth2 framework, there are 4 players: the user, the client, the authorization server, and the resource server. For the client or the user to be able to access resources from the resource server, it has to get an access token from the authorization server. Now, this flow I just mentioned is known as the authorization code grant flow. But there are in some other cases whereby the client would be the one to communicate directly with the resource server or the authorization server without the user being involved. This is a kind of machine to machine communication, and that flow is known as the client credentials flow. Now, before any further implementations of the code, let us take a look at this image that pretty much describes the whole of the flow. So right here, for the authorization code grant type, we have a situation whereby a user is trying to access resources using a client. So the client discovered that this user is not authenticated, so it redirects the user to an authorization server, and this authorization server is going to present a page for our user to authenticate himself, and the user provides the necessary credentials to get authenticated, which happens to be the username and the password. Now, if the user has been successfully authenticated, the authorization server is going to send a redirect back to the client, and while sending this redirect back to the client, it's going to include an access code. Now, for the second stage, the client, who also has his credentials, which credentials has also been configured, would send a request to the authorization server requesting for an access token. But then this time around, the client is going to provide some other credentials or some other values, which includes the response type, the verifier, the access code, and the client ID. Now, pardon me, there's an error here. This time around, there will be no response type. The response type only goes in the first stage. So just take note of that. And if successfully authenticated, as if the client has been successfully authenticated by the authorization server, the authorization server is going to return an access token back to the client. In this phase, the access code becomes invalidated. The access code can only be used once. Now we move over to the third stage, which is when the client just send the request direct to the resource server and say, I need to access a resource and here is my token. And if the token is valid, the resource server is pretty much going to respond, here is your requested resource, as the token is valid. So this is the flow of the O authorization code grant type. Now this is one of a video amongst many in this particular OAuth2 series. In the coming days, I'll be rolling out videos on the resource server as well as the OAuth2 client framework as well. So please do subscribe to this channel if you want to check out those videos when I post them, and give this video a thumbs up, as well as ping that bell icon so that you get notified when those videos are up and running. So with all of this explanation being given, we can get started with our code implementation. So we've seen a brief overview of how the OAuth2 framework can be implemented and the different grant types that it has. So like I stated in that overview, the grant type that we'll be implementing in this video is the authorization code grant type. And in order for us to provide the minimal configuration that will be needed for that grant type, we have to create a configuration class for it. Now, I'm not just creating a single configuration class, I'll be creating two different configuration classes. So to do that, we'll take a look at our topmost package. I want to create this class and I'll simply place it inside of a config package. So this should be config.security config. And the next class should simply be the app config class. And that is it. Now to make each of these class a configuration class, we have to annotate with that configuration. So go ahead and do that now. And now we create a couple of beans. And because the grant type we are looking at is the authorization code grant type, we have to provide a user for it. And we'll be making use of an in-memory user details service implementation for this. Now, like I stated, this is one of many videos that I'll be uploading in relation to the OAuth2 framework and Spring as a whole. In the coming videos, we are going to be seeing how to persist our user from a database. We won't be making use of in-memory configurations, but we'll be making use of real database, not just for our user alone, but for the registered clients, but for everything, because it's just a minimal configuration, just to show you an illustration of how to create an authorization server with Spring. We'll be making use of in-memory configurations in this particular video. So go ahead and create this bean. We have to annotate with that bean. It should be public user details service. User details service. Simply have to import that class, and we now have user is equal to user dot with username, and my username should be IO codes dot password. And it should simply be password as well dot rules, and I'll pass into role user and admin, and finally I'll have to build. Now to wrap this with an implementation, we have to return a new in memory user manager details, and then we'll pass in our user as parameter. That should be new in memory user details manager. And the next thing, as you all know, is to define a bean of type password encoder. So we should simply return an instance of no OOP password encoder. Oops, that's wrong. So we need to define these two beans because we have a user in the application, and it's an authorization code grant type. So definitely details for managing a user should be defined. So that is why we need the user details service bean as well as the password encoder bean. Now in real life scenario, you don't have to make use of this particular password encoder implementation, which is non OOP password encoder. You want to make use of a strong password encoder such as bcrypt or scrypt for encoding your password, and you have to make use of a database in real life scenario. Now the next bin we are going to be looking at is the registered client repository bin. So it should be admin as well, it should be public. And we have registered client repository, and we have to define an instance as well. So this should be registered client to be equal to with ID. It should be UUID dot random UUID. So it generates a random UUID, and right here in between these two, we want to provide the necessary details, starting with the client ID. So the client ID is simply client, and the client secret is secret dot client authentication method. So we are going to pass client authentication method, that should be client secret basics. So it implies that we are using just basic form of authentication to authenticate our clients whenever the client is trying to make a request to our authorization server. So this client we are taking a look at is an example of an application that might be built with the use of a front-end framework such as React, Vue, or even Angular. Then there are some cases where our server can also be a client. That is a different server. A backend application can be a client. So you also have to as well register that particular client with the respective details of the client. So in real life scenario, we have to save this registered client in databases. So in the coming days, I'll be rolling out videos on that, on how to persist all of this from the database. So we have this now. So right now I want to say dot token settings, and we have to pass token, and right here we build the details of this token settings, starting with the access token time to leave. We want to say duration dot of hours, and simply because it's just for testing scenario, I don't want to start building tokens every now and then. We can leave the duration to be 6 hours, and I have to tap this in a little bit. And here I want to set client settings as well, and we say client settings dot builder dot require proof key should be false. And just like I did above, we also have to tab this in as well. So we'll be looking at a scenario where this require proof key is true. Now by default it should be true, but because I'm not trying to generate a challenge in this scenario, I'll be explaining what the challenge is in the coming video. So just stay tuned. I don't want to start generating a challenge and a challenge verifier in this scenario. So I'm changing the configuration of require proof key from true to false. So by default, the value is true. So this should be it. And I pretty much want to see why I have this. Okay, we have to wrap with string value of the UUID that is being generated. So that is basically it. So now we've defined our registered client, but there's still something we're missing out, and that is dot authorization grant type, not types. And yeah, it should be authorization grant type dot authorization code. And we can also do dot authorization grant type again, and we'll pass in authorization grant type dot refresh token, so that we have a refresh token that we can use to call our authorization end server to generate a new token for us. So right now, one more thing is to return a new in-memory registered client repository, and then we are going to pass in our registered client just like we did for our user details service in case of a new in-memory user details manager. So now we've defined our registered client repository. We still have a couple of beans to define. The next bean we want to define is the authorization server settings bean. So this should be at bean, and we pass in our public again. Define our method. So this should be authorization not grant type but server setting, and this should be authorization server settings. And it's pretty much simple. Just want to return just an instance of this, so it should be return authorization server settings dot builder dot build. So it's as simple as that. The only scenario where you have to make changes to this is when you have a particular configuration to implement as well. Now, one thing I have to point out is that this authorization server settings is what we use to set other details such as the access endpoint token details. And I'll just pretty much show you an example. So we have dot authorization endpoint as one, and we also have JWK set endpoint as another. So this is just it. But then again, what we have taken a look at is the minimal configuration for us to get our authorization server started. So with this being returned, we are good to go. Now the next bean we have to define is our JWK source bean. So that is pretty much for the key that will be used to generate our token. So this should be at bean and public JWK source, and takes in a parameter which should be our security context. And now we have to say JWK source as the name of the function, and then we'll provide the necessary implementation, starting with defining the key pair generator. So this should be key pair generator, and I'm going to call this variable generator is equal to key pair generator dot get instance. So inside of this get instance, we define a string that represents the algorithm that will be used to generate our JWT token. Now this algorithm is pretty much ROSA, and we end with a semicolon. Now we have a squeaky line here, and it says it throws an exception to the method signature. So I'll just simply add that to our method signature. So after this, we have to initialize our generator. So this should be pretty much generator.initialize. I will pass in an int value of 2048, which simply is 2 bytes if I'm correct. And next thing should be to generate our key value pair. So this should be key pair is equal to generator.generate key pair. And now we want to get hold of an instance of RSA public key and RSA private key from our key pair. So this should be RSA public key. Public key is equal to a typecasted RSA public key, and this should be key pair again dot get public. And I think I made a little bit of an error, not that it's an error, but just to follow convention, not making use of camel casing in this scenario, so I have to correct that. Now we have our RSA private key as well. Should be private key, and this should be equal to RSA private key, and I'll say key pair dot get private. So with this public key and private key of type RSA, we can create an instance of our RSA key. So this should be RSA key. RSA key is equal to, I'll just simply close this. RSA key dot builder, and I have to first of all include a new keyword. And we pass now public key dot private key. We pass now private key dot id, or perhaps key id, not id, and this should be a string dot value of a UUID randomly generated ID, and finally we build. So what we want to return is an immutable set, so that should be new immutable JWK set, and right inside here we pass new JWK set, and we'll pass in our RSA key. So with this, we've defined our JWK source. So the algorithm that will be used for the generation of our key is RSA. So I'd just like to walk you through a brief overview of this app configuration class. Now, because we are going to be making use of the authorization code grant type, like I've stated previously, we have to define details for managing of the user. So we define an in-memory user details, and we also define a password encoder. And then we went ahead and defined an instance of our registered client repository. Now we define this, but we pretty much don't have a client. Okay, we don't have a client at the moment. And one more thing is that I have to set the redirect URL. So this should be redirect URL. I missed that, and since just going through it again, it just crossed my mind. So this should be http://localhost 8081, and that is basically our redirect URL. So it needs to be set as well. Pardon me for that tiny mistake. And yes, that bin is the authorization server settings. Then we went ahead to define a bin of our JWK source. Now what's remaining is to configure our security config class. So now we've defined all the necessary configuration. What's pretty much remaining is the configuration for our security filter chain. As with any other Spring Boot application we are planning to secure, we have to include the security filter chain bin. Now in this scenario, because it's an authorization server, we'll be including two bin of type security filter chain. So just look closely at first. We have to annotate with that configuration. And here we want to say add bin, and we want to set an order of 1, and I'll also have to annotate that properly. So that is it. And here I'm going to say public security filter chain, and we're going to say security filter chain, and it takes in an instance of HTTP security. And right here we want to set settings for our OAuth2 server configuration. So this should simply be OAuth2 server authorization server configuration dot apply default security, and we'll pass in our HTTP security instance. And the next thing is to, okay, I think it chose an error. So let's see the error it chose. So we have to add it to our method signature. Right here we are going to http dot get configurer, and then we are going to pass in OAuth2 configuration dot class, and dot, okay, is it configuration or configurer? Let's see. Okay, configurer dot class, not configuration. And now we are going to say dot oidc. I want to say customizer dot with default, so it applies the default value, and that should be it. And finally we are going to say http dot build, and this is pretty much what this security filter chain should return. Now the next filter chain we have to define goes like this. So we are going to say as being, or at being, then at order, set the value to 2, and this should be public security filter chain again. And we say default security filter chain, and right here we pass in our HTTP security as well, and simply choose exception again. And now we are going to say http dot form login, and yes, we want to pass customizer dot default, and finally we return http dot build. And before this, we want to ensure that requests that are coming in are authenticated, so we are going to say authorize http request, and simply say a, and a dot any request dot is authenticated or authenticated, and that is pretty much it with this definition. I need these spaces, just take them out. So if you record correctly, when we were setting our resource or register or our registered client, we said that for our clients to authenticate, it makes use of client secret basic. So we have to ensure that we are providing a scenario for our HTTP form login with default, so that we have a form presented to us for registering or perhaps authenticating our client, as well as the user in the first scenario. Now take a proper look at everything I've defined again, and then we can start our authorization server. So right here I've defined the user, okay, username with username, password, roles, build, returning it. And then again, the bin is no OP password encoder. We are good to go. Setting the client's ID, the client secret, authentication method, and we've set to grant type, which is authorization code, and refresh token. Refresh token is simply for getting a new access token whenever the previous one gets expired. And we also went ahead and set our redirect URI. We applied token settings to ensure that our access token lives for 6 hours. Now on the normal case scenario, that is in real world applications, your token should not be more than 30 minutes or an hour. So that is basically it. And we have also turned off PKCE, which is proof key to false. because we won't be making use of it. I didn't really generate any challenge, but in the coming video, I'll be explaining what the challenge is and why we need it. Now we are returning an in-memory registered client repository, and we also set our authorization settings. And right here we have our JWK source, which is the final bin. So we're using an instance of ROSA, a key size of 2048, and we're generating a key pair of ROSA public key, okay, and our ROSA private key. Okay, key pair dot get public twice, and this is wrong. And I'm grateful that I came back to take a proper look at what I've defined. So this should be get private and not get public. So with this, we are practically good to go. I don't pretty much think we are good to go, but we are good to go. I don't think we are good to go. We are good to go. That is the right statement. And now I'll simply run the application. So right here, I'll click on run. We are going to take a look at what we have. And then after taking a look at the endpoint that it has exposed for us, the well-known OpenID endpoint, since we've properly configured our authorization server, we're going to try to authenticate and get an access token with the in-memory user that we've defined, that the user with IO codes as the username and password as its password. Let's see. So our application has started. So I'm going to open up my browser. I think I'm going to close this one. And right here, there's this endpoint we are going to pay a visit to. It should be http / localhost 8080 /.well known /openid configuration. Then I'll click on send. So right here, I want to ensure that it's in a readable format. So we have a JSON response. So first of all, we have the issuer, which is our application running on localhost 8080, and we also have the authorization endpoint. We'll be making use of this authorization endpoint in the next few moments from now, and we are also going to be making use of the token endpoint. So these are the two endpoints that we'll be taking a look at in this particular video. And in the next video, which we will take a look at resource server and opaque tokens, we are going to be looking at JWK's URL, as well as the introspect URL and the revoke URL in the coming days. But then again, what we want to majorly focus on is our authorized URL and our OAuth2 /token endpoint. So this is basically the endpoint that it exposed. So I'm going to copy the whole of this, Control C, and right here I'm going to paste it here. And then for us to get a token and access code at first, we have to provide a couple of parameters, a couple of variables as query parameters to this endpoint, starting with the first one, which is the response type. So I'm going to say response underscore type is equal to code. As you can see, I've tried it prior to this moment, and we set our client ID. That's what ID is equal to client, and our redirect URI equal to http /localhost 8081, and that should be it. And now I'll send. Okay, we have an error that says the page is not working, so I think I'll have to include something else. Let's see. And scope is equal to open ID, and then I'll delete and I'll send again. Okay, we have an error that says invalid scope, and this is pretty much because I failed to define a scope in our bin of registered clients repository. So right here I'm going to just simply add the scope. And this scope should be open ID, and that is it. And now I'll run the application again. So back to our browser, I'm going to move back and set the scope. So this should be on scope equals open ID, and let's see. Response type is equals to code. Client ID is client. Redirect URI. I'm setting it correctly, and scope is this, and then I'll click on enter. Here we have a 401 as the response. So I'll check to see what I've not done properly. Okay, so pretty much there is one more setting I need to include. Probably that is the reason why I'm coming across this error. So this should be http dot exception handling. It should be e dot authentication endpoint URL slash login. New okay, and a semicolon. So this is just basically what I missed. So right now I'll just put all of this in a new line, and we need another bracket to round it off. So I'll run the application this time around, and hopefully we won't come across the 401 we are coming across. So you need to as well make that change. And if it happens that we come across the error again, which is the 401 unauthorized, I think I'll have to debug properly to get a proper solution to it. So okay, so right now I'm going to reload, and yeah, we have it. We are asked to please sign in. So we have to provide the necessary credentials, starting with IO codes, and then the next should be password, and then I'll have to sign in. So yeah, because we don't have any application running on port 8081, but you get to see that we have been redirected to this localhost 8081 with a new parameter code. So I'm going to copy the whole of this code. That should be Control C, and we want to send a post request to our to our token endpoint, which is this, and we'll be making use of Postman for that. So I'm going to move to Postman. So I'm going to open up Postman. I pretty much believe you already have Postman. Now if you don't have Postman, please do well to install Postman, or you can make use of a bash terminal and make use of the curl command to send a request to the endpoint. And then I think Postman is taking quite some time to open up, so let me just open up bash and see. So right now we're going to send a request using curl with git bash to our endpoint with our code. So this should be curl dash u. Then we are going to pass in the credentials of our clients this time around. Previously we we use the credentials of the user. So this should be client, a column, and then we pass in the secret. Then dash h, we want to specify the content type, and this should be application slash x dash www dot form dash url encoded. And then it should be a post request. Previously we did a get request, so you'll be able to impute the details of our user, that's the credentials. And now we are going to pass in the url, which is http colon slash slash localhost slash, sorry, not slash but colon 8080. And now we want to pass in our data, so this should be double quote, and starting with the first one, which is our client ID. We're going to pass in client, and grant type is equal to code, sorry, authorization code, not code, authorization code. And code, passing our shift and insert, which is, this is the code we copied. Please don't forget about that. And I missed something. That's the equal to sign, so I have to put it there. And now there's one more thing we also have to pass, our redirect URL. This should be redirect underscore URI equals to, you already know, this should be http slash localhost 8081, and we have to end with our double quotes, and then I'll send. Okay, this time around I didn't get any proper response. I'll have to check properly to see what I'm missing out on. I'm not getting any error in the form that an error was thrown. Let me see quickly. Okay, or perhaps I'll just simply take these ones out. Okay, yeah. The thing is that I'm supposed to pay this, I'm supposed to send this request to the slash token endpoint. So this should be slash OAuth2 slash token, and then I'll send. And we have an invalid grant. This is because we've already used this grant, these details to send in the request. That is our access code to send a request to this server already. So this is the reason for that. So we are going to get another code. So back to my browser, I'll just simply head back to this page, and then I'll pass in password again. Then we want to sign in. Let's see. And this is the code. I'll copy it once more. Control C, and back and move to the top again. I'll simply paste it again, and then I'll send. So now we have our access token. So this is just basically it. And now let's see, we have our ID token as well. The type is bearer, and it expires in this specified time. So this is about 21,600 seconds from now, I think so. Now I'll copy the whole of this, which is our access token. Control C, and we'll move over to the jwt.io endpoints to debug this token. So this should be jwt.io, and the debugger, and we want to paste our token. So Control V, and you discover that we have the details of this particular user. So we have the subject as IO codes, we have the audience as clients, and we have our scope as OpenID, as well as the issuer, which is our authorization server. And yes, basically the algorithm that was used for the generation of this JWT token was the ROS256 algorithm. So that is pretty much all about setting up an authorization server with Spring Boot. So that brings us to the end of this first video in the series. In the next video, we'll be looking at how to make use of an opaque token, and after that we'll take a look at how to store the user in our database, as well as persist registered clients, so that we can as well register a new client during runtime of the application and setting the respective credentials. So please stay tuned, subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and also ping that bell icon so that when all of those videos start rolling in, you will always get notified. Peace out, and until the next one, keep being your best self. I remain IO Codes.